Welcome to IR News YouTube channel. Putin's adopted son Kadyrov is more worried about the Ukrainian war than the Russian leader. As the tension in the Ukraine-Russia war reached its peak, the Russian army's withdrawal from the occupied Ukrainian territory one by one seems to have made Vladimir Putin very nervous. Russian troops suppressed by the Ukrainian armed forces are slowly fleeing towards the country's borders. The defeat of the Russian army, which the Moscow administration describes as a precocious withdrawal, is on the agenda of the Russian media almost every day. While the picture of the war was so bad in Russia, Vladimir Putin's declaration of mobilization throughout the country intensified the situation, but Putin had no other choice. If we look at the situation of the Russian army in the last 2 months of the war, many of its top generals were lost in Kherson, Kharkiv, and most of the southern front's Russian troops had to leave their weapons on the battlefield and flee. Currently there are many Russian soldiers in the Russian army who still have weapons from the old Soviet era. The Russian army, which has been devastated by the operations carried out by the Ukrainian armed forces at midnight, does not even want to fight in Ukraine anymore, because it does not seem possible at the moment for the Russians, whose shipping routes have been cut off, to send reinforcements to the Ukrainian fronts. In addition, Russia does not have enough professional soldiers. His adopted son Kadyrov also started brooding to save him while Putin was so stuck in the Ukraine front. Even if Kadyrov will get a big reaction from the Russian people, who will get put 10 out of the bottleneck, he can provide 2.5 million well-trained Russian soldiers to the Ukrainian front. We'll go over all the details about Kadyrov's incredible proposal in a moment. The Russian people and opposition groups in the Russian parliament became quite angry with Vladimir Putin. After the mobilization decision, every night the Russian people continue their protests in the streets with anti-mobilization banners in their hands. Russian parliament members, on the other hand, claim that Vladimir Putin is responsible for the Ukraine-Russia war and argue that he should give an account before the people in the face of these allegations. The Russian leader, on the other hand, has nearly 1,800 of his own citizens who participated in the mobilization and anti-war protests taken into custody with the help of the Russian security in response to the opposition group. In the Russian parliament, Putin states that bringing negative criticism about Russia during the war will harm the army, stating that this is the same crime as treason. While we evaluate the event from different angles, Russian leader Vladimir Putin is actually the person who is most worried, although he may seem comfortable in this process. Yes, without forgetting that there is another person who is as concerned about the Ukraine-Russia war as Putin. The Russian leader's arm in Chechnya is Ramazan Kadyrov. Kadyrov, who has not fallen off the agenda with his statements, is perhaps more worried than Putin about the situation of Russia and the Russian army. There are actually many other reasons behind these statements of Kadyrov, who shows how much he is loyal to the Russian leader with his words. "I say you command what Putin says. I am Putin's soldier who was elected president of Chechnya for the third time, received billions of rubles in the name of state subsidies and additional planned budgets from the Russian administration, even directly from the Russian leader Vladimir Putin during his reign. Since Russian leader Vladimir Putin is keeping Ramazan Kadyrov in power, Kadyrov looks up to him, stating that he was always with Russia and under the command of the Russian leader Putin. In the Ukraine-Russia war, Kadyrov had sent 2,000 soldiers to the battlefield to fight in Ukraine. So far, Chechnya's Putin Kadyrov has now made another statement that will move the agenda. The leader of Chechnya, Ramazan Kadyrov, called for the sending of a large number of security personnel to the war in Ukraine, including employees of the FSB, FSO, the Federal Prison Service, and the Ministry of Emergencies. According to his estimates, 2.5 million security guards could be sent to war from different parts of the Russian Federation. The number of soldiers Kadyrov intends to send to Ukraine is a very serious figure. This striking statement of Kadyrov is still among the most talked about topics at the moment. It is also estimated that Kadyrov has so far deployed around 10,000 Chechens to Ukraine's Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson regions. The Chechen leader, who does not act so sensitively for his own country, seems to want Russia to win the war more than Vladimir Putin, so much so that Kadyrov stated that he would consider his soldiers to be treasonous if they did not want to fight. In addition, Kadyrov addressed the Chechen group that fought for the Ukrainian army in the Ukraine-Russia war. Kadyrov described the Chechen group that fired bullets for the Ukrainian armed forces in the war as a group of drunken, cowardly, and ignorant traitors. Kadyrov, who also spread terror in his country, said to the local people who held an anti-war protest in Chechnya, Some people say that it's necessary to oppose partial mobilization. No one should argue with Putin's decision. Just obey. I urge all of you to stay away from these ridiculous demonstrations. He openly threatened. He also intimidated by sending Chechens who participated in the anti-Ukrainian Russian war actions to fight in Ukraine. Putin had given Kadyrov the rank of lieutenant general in recent months. The Chechen leader who tried to show his return went crazy after the defeat of the Russians against the Ukrainian army in the Ukraine-Russia war in the Kharkiv region. In fact, it was clear from every look that the Chechen leader was much more angry than Putin. Being responsible for the Russian defeat of Kharkiv, Kadyrov targeted the Russian Defense Ministry, stating that the Kharkiv defeat was due to the faulty war strategies carried out by the Russian Defense Ministry. Kadyrov's words to the Russian Defense Ministry under Shoigu: "They made a mistake, and I think they will draw the necessary results are actually good enough to reveal everything." After these statements of the Chechen leader, the arrows of criticism were suddenly directed at Shoigu. The Russian Defense Minister Shoigu, who was declared the scapegoat of the Ukraine-Russia war, has been burdened with all the political and diplomatic scandals of Russian leader Vladimir Putin with the support of the Moscow administration. The Russian Defense Minister Shoigu was called to account even for the parliamentary talks. The plan aimed by Chechen leader Kadyrov is to contribute to the passive position of the Russian Defense Ministry at the request of Russian leader Vladimir Putin. In this way, Russian leader Vladimir Putin would not only be able to destroy all the negative effects and consequences of the Ukraine-Russia war to the Russian Defense Ministry, but also to manage the Russian army administration as he wanted. The plan, supported by Kadyrov, went smoothly, and Russian Deputy Defense Minister Dmitry Bulgakov, who had the rank of Army General of the Russian Federation, was dismissed by Putin. It is said that the Chechen leader Kadyrov also had a hand in the dismissal of Russian Deputy Minister of Defense and Army General Dmitry Bulgakov. One of the first scandals of Russian leader Putin after mobilization. Very difficult days await Russia. The fact that some of the Russian people left the country after Putin's declaration of mobilization without waiting for these difficult days to come seems to accelerate the collapse period in Russia within the borders of Russia. There are no citizens officially left to be sent to war in Ukraine at the moment. Local people who did not leave Russia think that going to war is the same as death. The vast majority of Russian soldiers currently on the war fronts in Ukraine have the same opinion as citizens. Staying in Russia, it's a matter of curiosity how much the soldiers that Chechen leader Kadyrov will send to Ukraine and the Russian soldiers who are at a low morale will affect the course of the war. We will follow the war process closely together. Continue to follow us. Stay cool.